All right, we have a special guest here today. We have Queensland Member of Parliament from the Katter Party, Nick Dametto. Nick, thank you so much for coming on here today. Appreciate
Matt, it's an honour and a pleasure.
Yeah, it's the second time you've been on here, and I love the fact that, you know, you're not afraid to tackle tough issues. There's no big entourage around you here or producer or PR person. You are really a local person trying to affect positive change in our community and willing to come and talk with me when a lot of people wouldn't. I really appreciate that. So thank you for taking the time.
No, it's like I said, an honour and a pleasure to be on the podcast. And I think too many people these days that are actually in politics over-polished, given their their 4 or 5 lines they're allowed to say in front of Channel 7 or the ABC today. Not many of them will sit on a podcast and talk for 45 minutes to an hour where they can actually extrapolate their point of view, but then at the same time have people take, I guess, sound bites out of that for their pleasure later. But more than happy to continue doing the podcast because I think it's a great way to get the messages out.
100%. And I think what's happened now, especially in the post-COVID era, people are looking to podcasts and long-form conversations as a reliable source of information because I can watch you on the news, give you a little statement here and there, but if I want to get into the mind of Nick Dametto and what he thinks, an hour-long conversation is a great way to do that. And on that note, last time you were here, you gave us some really interesting information about the crime that's been going on in Townsville, even in North Queensland, about the Youth Crime Justice Act and how Youth Crime Act and how that there was a provision in there that enabled we were trying to find out, is it the judges, is it the politicians? And you said, no, Matt, it's actually a legislative issue because they have to expend every available option before detention. I was what? That's right. And you said to me that we tried to amend that, the Katter Party, and both the Liberals and Labors rejected it.
At the time, yes.
Yeah. So since then, I mean, this is probably a year and a half ago now since the last time we met. What has happened? Because we've got a new government that's come in. What has happened since then?
Well, Matt, it has been a big year and a half since we talked last, and we've gone through everything from the state Labor government trying to do a few things before the state election to try and improve things. These things with youth justice didn't improve. We had a change of government, and I truly believe people voted for the LNP in Queensland because they were voting against the Labor Party and their inaction on crime or their inability to bring youth crime in particular under control. We've had that change of government. The LNP now has a majority of about 5 MPs in the Queensland Parliament. And just before Christmas, the second week of Parliament, they actually pushed through legislation, their adult crime, adult time legislation, which was what they're calling now their first raft of changes to the Youth Justice Act. They actually removed that provision that detention must be a last resort. The previous Labor government had played with that piece of legislation, but essentially now the LNP's removed that from the legislation altogether. So the judges now don't have to cite that provision when they're sentencing these youth. The problem still lies, though, that there is lots of precedent set on sentencing youth. And what judges have to do is they have to go back to that precedent that's been set because they're very concerned, magistrates, or sort of judges, are always concerned about having their sentence overturned in the Court of Appeal because it's basically a public slap on the hand for that judge for getting the sentencing wrong. The only way I believe you'll actually fix that is by introducing minimum mandatory sentencing for some of those prescribed crimes that are hurting our community the most: the unlawful use of a motor vehicle, the break and enters,
that seems to be the main issue at the moment.
Correct.
Like they're breaking into people's homes, they're stealing cars, and it seems they're not even trying to make money out of stealing cars. They're just hooning around, trashing the car and leaving it as some type of joyride. It's really weird.
Yeah, there's a couple of layers to this actually, and there's some evidence that's been coming across my desk lately that suggests, yes, there's a cohort of children out there that are actually out there just joyriding, doing what they like at night, trashing and smashing your equipment, your house, burning your car for fun. But then there's also been some evidence that's come across that suggests that there's some adult involvement here, which is quite interesting, where it's been suggested that youth are being, I guess, exploited in some way by some of the adults out there that are using these kids that know they will get away with it once they hit the courtroom. So in some ways, I should say, offering them everything from status, money, and even drugs to do some of these crimes that are happening out there. So yes, there's layers to this, and it was only a matter of time, I would say, before adults started seeing these kids as a resource, especially these more organised outfits.
Wow. And, just that's interesting, actually.
Yeah.
The just before the election, there was this catch line, which it seemed to have been pinched from you guys about youth crime, adult, what is it? Youth crime, adult time?
Adult crime, adult time.
Adult crime, adult time, right? And so this idea that people sort of voted the government, that the government was going to actually resolve this issue, that they were going to put to bed this idea that the children can just get away with all these crimes because of the provision in the act, that was going to be resolved, that if you're going to do an adult crime and assault someone, break in the house, steal the cars, all the things you're going to do, start doing adult time, and those that legislation was going to stop protecting them. What has any solutions happened? They said they passed the law. What was it?
Yeah, so the adult crime, adult time policy, if you want to call it that was something that myself and other KAP members of Parliament came up with about a year before the LNP started talking about the concept. When we actually came up with the policy, we were actually quite prescriptive on the crimes that we wanted to make sure that were in that legislation if it was become a part of the legislation here in Queensland. Now, we wanted to make sure all those most heinous crimes like rape, all the way through to grievous bodily harm, murder, attempted murder, anything that would essentially constitute for a life sentence as an adult, that's how we decided whether or not it was an adult crime or an adult time. When the LNP took this on, they used the slogan very effectively during the election campaign. 10 points for that. But they weren't prescriptive on what was going to be in there. They said, we'll give you the details basically once you elect us. That happened. The legislation was passed, and there wasn't any of those crimes you're talking about right now, like break and enter or unlawful use of a motor vehicle. They weren't in the legislation. Other crimes, though, that also went in the legislation was rape. The most heinous crime you could probably do to someone without killing them, right? Not included in the legislation. Even attempted murder. We saw that shopping centre incident happen down south. That lady was attacked by a juvenile. Allegedly, it's probably still before the court, so I've got to be careful what I say there. But to think that that's not an adult crime, what was the LNP thinking?
And so let me get this straight. There was a bunch of the I think youth up in Cairns, and they did rape a lady, and they held the husband by knife point. Are you saying that they're not going to get adult time for something like that?
Under the current legislation, they will not be subject to adult crime, adult time legislation.
All right. So just want to make this clear, that all the things that we the Liberal Party sort of campaigned on, and all the ideas of actually resolving these issues about the youth running rampant and being able to held accountable for their actions.
Yes.
What were the things that they can now be held accountable for that they apparently changed?
Yeah, so grievous bodily harm from assault, murder.
Yeah.
Those were the two main ones that they changed.
Okay, so but they can still steal cars, rape people, break into your homes.
You got it.
If just those three alone, they're not going to be tried as an adult. So
That's
really,
correct.
it was all lip service. It was all a lie. Actually, I got Parko here. He's one of my best mates here, and he wanted to come and listen into this podcast because we talk about these things a lot about like, why is this still happening? Why is this being allowed? And I think there's two things here. The media have done absolutely nothing to make the public aware of what this. I speak to a lot of people. I'm in the game of people, okay? Right? Whether in, church circles and business circles, okay, in Townsville. No one's speaking about this. No one's talking about this idea that you can rape, these kids can rape people, can break in their homes, steal their cars after they pass this legislation, and there's still the same justice that actually happened before the government was elected.
That's right.
So nothing's changed ultimately.
And the response from the state government at this point in time has been, we'll assemble an expert panel. Now, it absolutely gets under my skin when I hear expert panel, because we've got to remember it's the experts that were driving the previous government. Stop listening to the experts, because the experts have got us into this position in the first place. The second point I'd make is, love him or hate him, Donald Trump's changing the world right now. He's changing the way politics is being run around the world.
100%.
He's doing some great things for his country. He, in the first few hours of being elected, started signing executive orders to change legislation in the United States. Fantastic. We need more leaders that lead and less leaders that are just relying on an expert panel to come up with the ideas for them.
100%.
If you want to be a leader, lead the state. Use your intestinal fortitude and actually do something from the front. People will follow.
100%. I totally agree with you. And the other thing is that, you know, we have so many people locally, and this is not just I guess a micro local issue in Townsville. This seems to be a national issue across the board and across Europe, and America's sort of leading the front on this, right? If you keep voting on the status quo, if you think Liberal and Labor are not just two sides of the same coin, nothing's going to change. We still have people voting these into government.
Yep.
You need to start looking at minority parties, independents, people like Nick, because if we're actually going to see change. We're going to see change. Now, before you came up here, I said, I'm going to talk about some tough issues today. And you didn't shy away from any of it. Now, I'll give you that courtesy that any sort of MP that does come on this channel, I'll tell you what I want to talk about, and I'll only talk about things that you're willing to talk about. You've said to me numerous times, anything on the table, we'll talk about it.
I'm an open book.
And I love that. I love that about you. And just getting this information, this is why these podcasts are important. You know, the social media is important.
Correct.
Because I would love, because I'm going to cut a reel on this 100% about the idea that nothing is ultimately changed. It is a facade. It is fakery. It is illusion to just cater to what the public want so that they can just stay in power.
Matt, I've always heard this during election campaigns from the opposition. They say, oh, we can't really do that. We can't really say that while we're in a campaign mode because we don't want to offend people. And then they say, you just get us into government and we'll make sure we do what you want. Then they get into government, and then what do people want when they're in government? You'd hope they want to change things for the better. Most politicians, though, just want to stay in government. They want to stay in power. So what they won't do in opposition, they're not going to do in government. If they're worried about offending people in opposition, they're not going to do it in government. And once again, why do we have people continually going back to these so-called experts? Once again, the experts got us into this position in the first place. And also, a lot of those experts have come from universities which have been left-leaning from the early 70s.
Do they set up like a new panel of experts each time? Like, where are they sourcing these experts from?
Well, that's right. You know, we've got when there's a new government, they'll assemble their own panel of experts. But they all come from the same education pool. They've all come from the same places. And the same ideology that's driven us for the last 10 years at least into the wrong direction. So trying to ask someone from one of the major universities in Queensland or Australia their position on how we should deal with youth crime when it hasn't been working for the last 10 years, what would you ask them? They've been advising the previous government.
Yeah. Hey, Nick, this is my mate Seb, right? Seb is, I'm not sure if you've seen it, he's got about 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, a lot of them local because he does food reviews. Now listen to this, bro.
We love food.
Yeah,
Us Italians love food.
Yeah, we love food. Hey, his channel's awesome. Now listen to this, bro, because you just came in. Last time Nick was on here, we asked about this idea about the youth crime, why is it happening, all that. Now, you know about the whole thing about adult crime, adult time. You know that thing that the government got voted on? The only two things that they changed was, what were they again? There was a murder, grievous bodily harm. That if you do that, you get adult time.
Assaults,
but you can still steal cars, you can still break into people's homes, you can still rape people, and you're not gonna get judged as an adult. So trial than that. Or lip service. Did you hear any about that? Yeah. Okay.
And it's so important that you're talking about this because people aren't digesting media and information like they were 30 years ago. 30 years ago, there was one newspaper, there was no social media. That might have been the start of the internet where people on, back channel, blog channels or whatever, but most people were just digesting their information from one source. And very easy way to actually control the public. But in saying that, I even have to educate my own staff. We'll have a really good day in the media as a local member. Channel 7 will run it on TV that night. ABC turns up for the press conference. Channel Win or Nine's there. Townsville Bulletin turns up as a local rag. And, we call it the Quinella. Yucks, someone the next day. Did you hear that on the news last night, what we said? No. There's so many other ways of getting information in right now that the normal or the usual sources of information aren't even being used or utilised. That's why it's so important to use and utilise channels like yourself because the fact is you've got to tell the story 100 times before 50% of the people out there will actually hear it, because there's so many different ways of digesting or gaining that information these days.
100%. And, since post-COVID, people have become distrustful of the news. They got probably it was a worldwide $100 billion marketing campaign that, that people got bullied into and coerced into making the decision. And, no judgment for whoever did or did not take it ultimately, but there was so much pressure, and then it turned out not to be what everyone said it was going to be, and they become distrustful. So other sources of information are very important. The social media, whether they like it or not, legacy media are dying.
Yep.
The podcast, the social media, the Instagram, they're all taking over, and they're doing far bigger numbers than what they could possibly dream of. They either join or they die.
Correct. It's interesting because I'll have an elderly person sort of cross me in the street and go, I saw you on Channel 7 the other night. What was I saying? I don't know, but you're giving it to them. You're telling them. You're telling them. And how much information can you actually get out in a 15 to 20 second soundbite?
No.
But it's good for people to see you active, but not a lot of people actually getting in-depth information from those 3 minute or 1 minute packages they put together.
Yeah. So just very quickly for some of my audience, right? You do have an Instagram.
Yes.
Do you have a YouTube?
Actually, we have got a YouTube, but we have been uploading some of our speeches and that from Parliament.
Yeah, because these things that you're saying, like I wish I want to know them. I want to have a source where locally for Queensland and for North Queensland to understand what's going on, like the complexities, to hear you speak. That's why I love inviting you on, and you can get this information because it's very important. It's very valuable. Like we want to, because we're not getting it from mainstream sources. So like, is there a way, and what's the best way for people to sort of engage with your content and find out more about you and understand what's going on? Like say they want to understand on a daily basis in Parliament.
On a daily basis, my Nick Dametto, MP, that's my Member of Parliament Facebook page, my Instagram account. I try and keep my Instagram account more, not personal, it's an open account, but more who's Nick Dametto. When he's not got the suit on or doing the polished speech in Parliament. So it's more fun-loving stuff, who I am. So Nick Trip 18 is my Instagram handle. I'm also on Twitter or X now. Also on...
do you use that regularly, X?
Yeah and no.
No. But is Facebook like...
Facebook's the place to go.
Facebook's the place to go. So if I want to find out what's going on about like what's happening locally, this type of information...
Correct.
Facebook's a good place for that.
Nick Dametto MP.
We'll leave a link in the description for that for people to find out about that. And that's important because, look, I want to know... Because last time you told me on the podcast, you said, look, Matt, we're chasing the balance of power.
That's right.
Okay, if we can get the balance of power, we can control the outcome here.
Correct.
Now, was there any success in the last election in gaining an extra seat or anything like that? Like where are we at in terms of, independent minority parties, the status quo? Like how's it all looking and shaping?
So we come very close to gaining an extra 2 seats in the last state election. Unfortunately, people did go with the status quo in many cases. It upsets me.
Where were those 2 seats?
So Morenni as well as Mulgrave.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and this upsets me, but it's also a pat on the back with a slap at the same time, because so many people will come up to me and say, Nick, I love what you guys do. I love what you guys do. I love what the Katter Party says, but it's only 3 years in Parliament. You haven't got enough power to do anything. I say to myself, well, we do have power to do things, but you could give us more power if more people voted for us.
For sure.
They can't have people continue to say, we want to see more of yous in there, but then don't vote for us.
Yeah.
Or we love what you guys are doing.
How many more seats to get, say in Queensland specifically, to get control?
Yeah, so my understanding is right now the LNP up 5 seats from a minority government. So they've got a 5-seat majority essentially at the moment. So we would have to actually gain a few more seats, at least 5 to basically get it off them. But as you come into their second term, the shine sort of rubs off a little bit. There'll be people that voted LNP this time round just on the topic of crime. If they don't fix that problem in the next 3.5 years, there's a good chance those voters might swing somewhere else. And then there's an opportunity for us to find some fertile ground at the voting booth.
Okay. And a quick question: how do you go about with candidates? To find that, I'd love that there was another Nick Dametto that thought obviously there's not.
Yeah.
So how do you go about actually vetting candidates that can really understand that that people are fed up and they want to fix local issues? How does that process work? Just curious.
So myself, Robbie Catter, and Shane Knuth, we sit on the Federal Management Committee, or the Federal Executive for Catter's Australian Party, with a number of other people. It's like the board.
Yeah.
And we go through and vet people. And as you probably have noticed, I've got a fair bit of autonomy what I can do and say. Robbie Catter has the same, and so does Shane Knuth. And it's not because we don't care what each other are saying. It's because we've signed up to our core values and principles as a party. Anyone that wants to run for Catter's Australian Party as a candidate, we ask them, please go on our website and look up our core values and principles. If you agree with our core values and principles, we're happy to talk with you. And we're going to quiz you on those things as well. Then the next step is making sure that they are doing it for the right reasons. So it's almost like being a small outfit is almost like guerrilla warfare. We can move quickly, we're agile, but you know what? You trust the guy or the woman. If there's a lady that's elected one day with Catters, you trust the person you're back to back with when you're fighting in that, up against 300 when there's two of you, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So you've got to have good people. You've got to have people that also can connect with the community as well. People that are also wanting to do it for the right reasons.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that note, one of the reasons I saw and asked you to come back on is about this idea about Castle's Law.
Yeah.
Right? Castle Law. Now, can you please explain to the viewers what Castle Law is? Yeah,
so Castle Law is actually, the concept was actually conceived back in the United Kingdom, back in the day in the 1600s, way back then, where basically it was a civil case at the time where someone was defending their property, and it was essentially a man's castle is his home, and therefore he can defend it as such. That was essentially the ideology it was born out of. So if you're in your home, that's your place of refuge. That's your safe place. That's the place you bought, you own. It's private property. So you should be able to defend that from anybody that crosses what I call the Rubicon, the front door, as they come through. Now, that's been, moved around, changed, and legislated in different countries across the world. And states in the US do it quite well, where if you come into someone's home, that's it. Any means necessary that person deems at the time necessary, they can use that. Whether it's in America, where you can use firearms for self-defense, a cricket. They don't have cricket in the US. A base, whatever. You're in someone's house. You've made the wrong decision, and we're trying to see that kind of legislation enacted here in Queensland. Now,
and that's just real quick, with a lot of people breaking into Townsville homes and North Queensland homes, if you assault one of these persons in your own house, you could be charged.
That's right. That's right. There was an absolute horrible case down in the Burdekin a couple of years ago. You might have remembered where there was two people trying to get into a property where
some lady went in.
A lady went in, and the young gentleman that was defending himself used a knife, and he spent weeks, months afterwards defending himself and what he did by defending himself in his own home, when he actually killed these two people while defending himself. Now, there was an inquest and all sorts of horrible things, but
did they charge him?
I'm not 100% sure.
I know that they investigated him.
They investigated, but he wasn't charged from memory. Don't take that as gospel. But what I would say is, if Castle Law was enacted here in Queensland and you had the legislative right to defend yourself, galvanise your right as a homeowner to defend yourself, if in that case there, it should have been the police turned up. Who are these guys? They're dead. Did they break into your house? Yes.
Yeah.
Did you defend your house while they were trying to attack you? Yes. No more questions asked. That should be the end of it.
Sounds fine with me. Parker, are you happy with that? Yeah? Yeah, as it should be. Because why? Because you got your kids in your house. I have to tell you one thing. Like, as a father, I got two daughters and a wife. If someone break in my home,
there's a lot of Queenslanders that are saying it to me right now, and people across Australia that are tuning in on this. Castle Law is already enacted in my house, most people are saying.
Yeah.
But the last thing you should do, have to do, I should say, after defending your house, your property, or your loved ones, is calling 000 and then your barrister to try and keep you out of jail.
I know.
You've just protected your house, and you're going to have to mortgage it to probably spend $100,000 to keep you out of jail. That's ludicrous.
Where are the Liberals and Labors out on this? What have they said?
I can tell you, we actually put this legislation into the House before this last state election because we wanted to know where, and the Queensland voting public wanted to know where Liberal and Labor sat on this.
Yeah.
It went through the committee process, but they dragged it out and it never got debated before the state election. So the easiest way to get legislation enacted in Queensland is to convince the government of the day to adopt the policy, and that's what we're doing at the moment. We're applying pressure to the LNP government to adopt Castle Law as their own policy. They've adopted a number of KAP policies in the past. Why not another one that makes sense? If they don't adopt it over the next couple of years, we'll actually reintroduce the legislation ourselves. We'll force the Queensland State Parliament to vote on this.
Okay. How long will you wait to do that?
We're going to use the next year and a half to put that pressure on the government because even if we put the legislation in the House, we need the government's support to vote for it.
For sure.
And we've put good legislation in the House before where we've seen and demonstrated where both Liberal and Labor have voted against it because it's not theirs.
Okay.
Just out of spite. That's the horrible part of politics.
So what would be the mechanics behind, say, waiting a year and affording them that time? I'm just curious about how the political world works in terms of like why, because that sounds like a good idea. Force their hand. Like at the very least, the legislation hasn't necessarily changed in order to stop these youth crime going on. Okay. So is this a good opportunity to force the government's hand to go, do you really care about homeowners? Do you really care about the people that are suffering or true victims of these crimes?
Well, you've seen the wave start to build where the public aren't happy right now. They trusted the incoming government to change legislation to stop the crime out there. It hasn't stopped. So that wave.
Are you seeing much stats on that on your end? Like I had a youth crime justice person stay at the hotel here. Now I can't reveal names. I said I wouldn't reveal anything, right? That's fine. But what they did tell me was they did tell me that the crime seemed to be slightly less, the data, but there seem to be far worse the crimes. And like what we mentioned about the rape and the assault and the breaking. So there seem to be a lot of repeat offenders. They're doing worse things.
So it's always statistics are really interesting to pull apart because you can make things look good or bad. It doesn't matter
100%.
how. So while some statistics were coming down last month, the actual unlawful use of a motor vehicle was going up. So if you take it across the board, yes, maybe crime was dropping for a little bit. Hey, it's been raining here for 2 months in North Queensland. Maybe they're not going out committing as many crimes in the rain. Who knows?
Yeah, true.
Who knows? But statistically, on motor vehicle theft, it was actually up year on year from last year. So, it's I always say when people stop reporting or screaming at MP officers about their cars being broken into and stolen, their houses being broken into, the assaults happening in the parks, people not feeling safe walking to their cars at night, when that comes down, that's when we should be happy, not because we had a little blip in the pie graph or the bar graph.
As a layman, doesn't know a lot about politics and the mechanics behind it. So is there a possibility to amend the new legislation that they just passed? Like, does the Liberal government, does the government have the ability to pass, since they have a 5-seat majority, to pass anything they want?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So is it possible for you to amend to include these other crimes, like the person that got raped in Cairns and the break and entering? Like, has anyone suggested that to them? Let's do this now?
Yeah. So every time the media or other members of parliament have actually called for this, their position right now is we're assembling an expert panel and we're going to have recommendations from this expert panel, which will help us decide on our next raft of changes to the legislation.
And when's that forecasted to happen?
How long's a piece of string?
So it's just a delay tactic to string it out. What would be, in your mind, from what you see, what would them stopping them from doing it? Is it like is there massive amount of money flowing into the youth in bureaucracies or like what? It doesn't make any sense to me why they wouldn't want to pass this legislation. So what do you think's stopping them?
It's a really good question, Matt. Really good question, because I truly believe in the incoming government, there's actually some really good people in there. There's some really good people. Even the Premier of Queensland grew up in Ingham. I feel that he's a good person, and I think he does want to change things for the better of Queensland. What's stopping him? That's the $1 million question. I don't get to sit in the party room. I don't get to meet in the the Premier's office with the people that are lobbying him
Do
right
you
now.
ever get to like talk to him and call him, or like, do you ever meet with him and have one? Does he do those type of things?
Yeah. So,
I remember having dinner with
Mm.
Mr. Christopher Foley
Yep.
at Dynasty Restaurant. This was probably
an
10 years ago.
institution in Townsville.
I know, right? 10 years ago, I met with him, had dinner with him.
Yep.
Nice guy, all
Yep.
good. And everyone sort of knew this guy was going to go well in
Yeah,
politics.
yeah.
Like there was this
It was up and
expectation.
coming.
So like, are you able to have a communication line with him and get
Yeah.
his inner thoughts or anything like that? Or
Yeah, so to be fair,
Yeah.
we've just had one of the worst natural disasters in North Queensland in my hometown of Ingham in the last 50 years. We had torrential rain, floods that we've never seen before.
Yeah.
I was very impressed with David's response to the floods, but also the way he, I would say, brought me into the tent to help me work with the ministers and the departments during that time, because it was a natural disaster. Didn't matter what colour shirt you're wearing. It shouldn't
Plus,
matter.
they're
in
your
this.
constituents.
So it was a
You
good
would have to go,
opportunity, to actually build a relationship with the incoming Premier.
Okay.
And, there is an open line of communication at this point in time with David, and I'm very grateful for that. But at the same time, he's got people in his own party to also convince and also bring along for this journey as well. And like I said, I don't know what the mechanics in the back room look like.
I know, because from an outside perspective, it's like, why don't you just ask him? But then you realize there's all these other factors involved. There's all these other people involved.
Yeah,
you have to get
yeah.
the win the party, and then you start to think about all these sort of corporate powers behind the party, about all the influencers, all the lobbyists. So to me, it doesn't make any sense, and it'd just be great. Premier Christopher Foley, it'd be great just to know why can't we protect local people from people being prosecuted for rape and breaking. Just let's just say, like the three things you mentioned before: rape, breaking and entering someone's house, stealing a motor vehicle. Why can't we get these attempted murder? Why can't we get these youths to actually be tried as an adult for that? Like those are the things that are affecting people the most in
That's
North
your
Queensland.
visual crimes.
Yeah,
They're the
so-
things on the front page of the paper.
I'd love to put that question to you. I'd love to hear an answer why we can't do that. It seems simple. It seems effective. It seems like something that could create real change, and not just the person. And if not, why? Why can't we do it?
And I think the next step, even if you change that legislation, you've got a lot of these kids that couldn't care less about going into Cleveland Bay Detention Centre. It is a holiday camp for them. I talk to people that work out there, and these kids some days are running the show out there. They get what they want. They are very manipulative. They might have come from very disadvantaged families and all those sorts of things that the bleeding hearts talk about, but they are intelligent, they are smart, and they know how to get the way out there. Now, if you've got a scenario where people or young people are trying to get into a detention centre, then your methodology of incarceration isn't working as a deterrent. Excuse me. Years ago, people didn't want to go to prisons because they were a horrible place. And I'm all for rehabilitation, don't get me wrong. But there needs to be a toughness or an element of toughness to the incarceration that makes you not want to go there. That's why we've been pushing for years for our relocation sentencing policy. We want to send kids to remote Queensland, 45, 50 degree heat out there, not a very nice place to be, doing, not out there breaking rocks, but learning skills like fencing, concreting, block work, carpentry, those sorts of things that may actually transpire after being out there for 6 to 12 months learning something that they might be able to plug in while they're when they come back into town. And maybe even teach some of their little cohorts, hey, there's more to crime. There's an opportunity, but you also you don't want to go out there, because I was eating a kilo of flies a week.
Yeah,
it's
there's
pretty
also
harsh.
the pragmatic approach that last time we spoke, you said like they're running out of jail cell space, and and there's no foreseeable construction of a new one being made in the foreseeable future.
Yep.
So it's actually a pragmatic approach to resolve that issue as well, because there's nowhere to put them. Is that still the same issue at the moment?
Still the same issue, and it's costing upward of $1,200 a day to keep a child out there at Cleveland Bay Detention Centre. That's ludicrous. That's more than most people's wages, $1,200 a week. And that's what it's costing them a day to keep a child out there. There's got to be a cheaper way to do this.
It's funny, like sometimes a good deterrent, just passing legislation years, that could be the deterrent that they need to stop doing these things that I could go away for years. But if there's an allowance to keep doing it, this person that told me from youth crime justice, whatever, they said that they were going to do a study they're doing these studies as to why they repeat offend.
Yeah.
And like the idea was, okay, so it sounds good on the basis that they want to get to the source of the issue, then tackle the source of the issue. But while they investigate all that, people are then suffering. So, I mean, what would be your suggestion? Like, especially with a natural disaster, say like for the next 12 months, what's the aim of for you personally and for the party about to create some effective change in Queensland?
Yeah.
What's the game plan?
So the game plan at the moment is making sure that, yes, the number one crime problem here in Townsville is youth crime. We want to make sure that we're putting the pressure on the state government while they've got this expert panel working in the background and some recommendations to come forward to actually make sure that they change the legislation for the better. That's one of our number one priorities. But, we've got things like the Brisbane Olympics right now that is going to be the biggest party that Queensland's ever seen, at the detriment, I believe, of regional Queensland. Townsville, it's been announced that we'll get the sailing here and a couple of soccer games.
What's this, 2032?
2032, that's right. You start building these massive stadiums in Brisbane, they're going to suck the wealth out of the state. Not just, taking large chunks out of the budget, which should be used to build nation-building infrastructure, if you're asking me, but also the materials and the manpower to actually build these things. You create this huge vacuum in regional Queensland when you start building all these things in the city. People start going to where the work is. And then even if you wanted to build something in North Queensland, who's going to do it? Where's the workers going to come from? So I've been against the Olympics from the start, not because I don't value sport, not because I don't value the idea of people getting involved and there being a well stage to actually test yourself and your skills of these things, but because Queensland's not ready for this. And
we already have an inflation problem here at the moment. I mean, them spending hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars.
Billions.
What's it forecasted? How much?
Some people have been talking tens of billions of dollars here.
But we don't have enough money for a new prison. Okay. Yeah.
Or hospitals.
Unbelievable.
Schools.
You know what? Because I asked for your permission to talk about this, a controversial topic that you don't hear too much. Because it goes to this idea where we keep talking about the greater good and virtue signaling and looking after people and no harm. At the moment, there was a lot of talk about abortion.
Yes.
Right? And abortion, it's not allowed to be spoken about or something like that in Parliament. What happened there? Why can't we talk about that in Parliament?
So during the state election, the topic of abortion really blew up. Now, if you follow the media trail and what I noticed, there was an LNP member of Parliament that actually talked about it during a candidate forum, his views on abortion. Then it was picked up by a couple of Labor female ministers. They then brought that into the public space, and they were trying to put pressure onto the LNP government during the election campaign on whether or not they would change the abortion laws in Queensland. Now, they stonewalled on that. And they needed a bit of a hook. And Katter's Australian Party actually introduced legislation last year before the election, which wasn't debated, to actually make it a crime not a crime. The legislation was called Babies Born Alive legislation. So babies that are born alive in Queensland were being reported to us through late-term abortions, being left to die in waste paper bins, on silver medical waste platters, stuff like that. Just horrible stuff.
And guys, if you think we're exaggerating here, there's an Instagram account by Dr. Joanna Howe, and she's actually got videos on this. They are graphic. There's a warning symbol before you click on it, where there's babies being left in buckets on platters just to die. They're alive and they're just left to die.
These are little humans. These are little babies, and
it's really sick. It's really sick to think that this is happening.
Yep.
In our state.
And the legislation was, as far as I'm concerned, quite benign. The legislation we were trying to put in was to just give those babies the right to die with dignity at that time. So a nurse could actually just comfort them or put a warm blanket around them while they're passing away, because they're usually not viable. They've been born in an abortion. They are going to pass away. It wasn't about saving their lives or anything like that, just giving them some dignity as they passed away instead of throwing them away in a waste paper bin like nobody cared about them.
What about
their
if
last breaths with the medical waste?
What about if they could survive? And are these babies being used for medical research as well. Like a lot of these aborted fetal tissues, like you hear about Planned Parenthood in the States. Like, are they utilizing these for medicines and things like that?
I have heard that in different countries that's the case. I can't confirm that's happening in Queensland.
Are we allowed to do that in Queensland?
I don't know. Actually, I don't know.
Because it's like, this idea of leaving babies to die like that, and you would think like any human that's born alive, it's a human being. And we talk about, we're trying to pass laws that, stop people from misgendering someone because of the importance of identity, right? But like having like a baby that is left to die, you would think the implication would be if we saw someone dying on the street, we'd just run to them and try and help them and give them medical help. But it's the idea that, that they're born alive and they're just left to die is something that's a little bit sickening.
Yep.
And this happens even locally.
That's right. So, we've had reports of people that work at one of the local hospitals here where there's actually a room, they call it the Rainbow Room apparently, that's what's been alleged, this is where they wheel the kids into, or the babies born alive during late-term abortions to die, or they put them into a freezer to, I guess, speed that process up. Horrible stuff. And, I've heard this information from people that have worked in a local hospital, and it just makes you sick to think that this is happening in Queensland.
I even wherever everyone sits on the abortion debate, I think like they reckon there's this stat, I can't remember it offhand, but a vast majority of people like post first trimester are against abortion.
Yeah.
The idea of a late-term abortion when the baby is like 4, 5, 6, 2 weeks away from being born, that people thought that doesn't happen is allowed. They thought it was illegal in Queensland.
Yeah.
But that can actually happen in Queensland.
Matt, I always remember when the legislation was passed here in Queensland by the previous state Labor government.
Yeah.
And I always remember I was at a function, and a group of women came up to me quite irate to know that I had voted against the legislation. And I said, well, hang on a sec. You're trying to turn this into a yes-no question and answer. Are you for abortion or are you against abortion? Everyone just wants a yes-no on that. I said, well, as a Queensland Member of Parliament, we actually vote on the legislation. And part of that legislation was with 2 doctors signing off, you could actually have a late-term abortion up to 37 weeks. I said, so you support a late-term abortion at 37 weeks. And this small group of ladies pulled up right there and they said, is that the legislation that passed? They were shocked. So it doesn't surprise me that with that stat you gave me earlier.
It's absolute madness that we live in a world where people would even tolerate the idea of killing a baby after, like so close to being born, and being okay with that. And most people aren't. I think there's a state of ignorance out there, but there is this thing where, like right now, these late-term abortions are occurring, and it's happening locally. And mind you, we have this virtue signaling of the idea of like, whether it be looking after disprivileged groups and minority groups and oppressed groups, while babies are still, is there any demographic in our society that's more vulnerable than a baby? Like
only someone at their end of life. Only someone at end of life.
Yeah, I mean,
palliative care. And that opens a whole nother. That might be a whole nother podcast.
With the whole, I know, with all those other things. Look, there seems to be a lot of issues going on, and it's a tough thing. You can't solve all the problems, right? You can't solve all the problems, and there's certain things that you get voted on specifically to address as well.
I can't solve all the problems. Kaz Australian Party can't solve all the problems, but what I would say is there is a lot of topics that are on the table for conversation because Kaz Australian Party are putting them on the table. We are bringing up the hard topics. We are willing to sit here in a podcast and talk about the stuff that other people might shy away from. Yeah. And I think that needs to be acknowledged, because without brave people in the Queensland Parliament, a lot of these things will never be discussed. Yeah. There's a lot of people in the Liberal and Labor Party that won't want to discuss this stuff, and they'd be happy not to have it introduced in the Queensland Parliament. So back to your point at the first question, there has been a motion passed in the Queensland Parliament post the election, which we are not allowed to discuss, debate, or even introduce legislation on abortion during this term of Parliament.
Yeah.
And that was passed by the House.
Yeah, wow.
Yep.
You look, here's the thing, and maybe we can probably, finish on this point too. I think you know what my biases and presuppositions are. I mean, I'm a pastor at Beaches Church. I'm a preacher. I'm a local business owner, and I've gone on this whole other path about what I think the idea of Christian ethics and principles and how it's really built up our Western understanding of the world, which has the most prosperity, the most freedom, liberty, equality. You know, it's the idea of these God-given inalienable rights. You know, I saw in your reel about, a God-given right to protect your home.
That's right.
You know, and it's amazing that many politicians today find the idea of God offensive, have a secular mindset so far that it's got to be away from government, right? But when you take God out of the equation, and what we've seen throughout history, it leaves a vacuum.
Certainly does.
And you find these politicians or these socialists, these Marxists, the first thing they do is want to get rid of religion and belief systems to supplement that with the state becoming the official religion, the state becoming God. History shows that time and time again. And it's amazing that these people that want to say, make fun of the idea of, say, believing in God and the idea of morality and spirituality and something, having an objective truth and standard, they reject that, and then they want to supplement it with what they think. Now, I was mentioning to you before about, I saw this righteous indignation from Jackie Lambie, right? About, the people that didn't get the COVID shot. And, almost like if there was internment camps or prison camps, she wanted to chuck them in because the things that she was saying are horrible. Now she knows all the data that's come out. She's running away from that. But this idea of this arbitrary subjective standard that ultimately we have a bunch of people in government like the former premier that coerce people into getting this shot, otherwise they lose their job. And then the year later, when it all cools down, passes a non-coercion bill. This arbitrary subjective standard where you take God out of the equation, all you're doing is supplementing it with your mind.
Correct.
Your arbitrary standard about what you want. So I know that you've got faith. I know that you believe in God, and this idea of God-given inalienable rights actually is important for people, especially the people that don't believe.
Absolutely. And, Australia was built on Christian values. You have a look at the 10 Commandments. Most of your laws go back to those sorts of commandments, right? Don't steal, don't murder, those sorts of things, right? You have a look at other legislation that's been created over the years. It is people's view of the day of what's right and what's wrong. But if you haven't got a center of truth to go back to, if you haven't got some teachings, you haven't got a moral compass that's been instilled in you, and most of those have been instilled through religion over the years. And through my Christian faith, that's where I find I understand right from wrong. And if you take that away, what do you have? You've got all sorts of ideology floating around the Queensland Parliament right now. You've got people right now that believe it's okay for someone to, be a cat if they want to be a cat, or incarcerating young children. We're
sending men to female. We're sending males to female prisons.
It's unbelievable,
and they're raping females.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So you take away, I guess, a center of truth, God from the equation, whatever you want to call it. You take that out. What do you have? You've got people that are making up this stuff as they go along. And that can be very scary, because if you get good people in there, mightn't be so bad. But if you've got really evil people in there, and I've seen evil people out there in the world, God help us.
Yeah, and you know what? That's a really good point what you said about the center of truth. We may argue about what the truth is. Everyone's got a claim to truth. But the idea of believing in God is believing in an objective standard and something that we can appeal towards.
That's right.
Because if God doesn't exist, what's the justification to implement a moral duty? Why? Because I said so? Which is what you're seeing in Parliament now. Because I said so.
Yep.
Because I think it's good. Because I want you to do this. Well, if we're just matter in motion and biomechanical machines, what's the point? So, I mean...
Define good, though.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the name of this podcast. What do you mean by good?
Exactly.
It's a question that I get into a lot of debates, and there's a question that... This is the interesting part. These politicians, right, that don't believe in God, they appeal to a universal standard, good, without defining it. They say it's incumbent upon you to do it because we should treat people well. We should have this no harm, except when it comes to little babies and except when it comes to people protecting themselves in homes. It's such an arbitrary standard of what they want to believe.
Well, if you've got perhaps a satanic push of what they want, or what they think's good for them, and everyone can do what they like, because that's what they're trying to push right now for a lot of this leftist stuff, right?
Yeah.
Do whatever you like. You want to be a cat, be a cat. You want to, be a girl today and a boy tomorrow. Do whatever you like, whatever makes you happy. Well, hang on a sec. We've got to come back. There is a set of rules here and a set of standards that we need to live by, because if you just let people do whatever they like and you descend into complete chaos of liberalism, do we go back to a world before the Ten Commandments and Moses pulled them down from the hill?
Look,
after speaking to the burning bush,
I'll tell you this, even from if you despiritualize it and be very pragmatic, you look at a country where Christian ethics haven't touched, or the gospel hasn't touched, versus where it is. You may not want to believe in the Christian God, so be it, but it's the one thing that stands between you and woke culture and other ideologies wanting to take away your rights, wanting to take away the equality between men and women. These things, the Christian worldview guarantees the equity and the fairness and the equality that people are so seeking. It's like people are using free speech laws to ban free speech. You're going to destroy the very thing that you are trying to actually ascertain, which is freedom, liberty, to be oneself. And when it's
contradictory, isn't it?
Exactly. It's self-defeating. So look, I'll say this. I think it's very brave of you to come on and have these conversations. I really thank you for your time. I would like to ask you to give it like a closing statement about if people want to see local change within their community, especially in North Queensland, what would be the effective avenue to go about that?
We have a changing world at the moment, and I really believe there is a swing back to the centre or centre right. It's gone too far the other way, and it's affected people. And I think people in general feel as if it doesn't affect me, it's not a problem. Well, the march of the left started affecting everything from how people were being taught in schools right through to what you can and can't do in the workplace. And people are sick of that. The people are being sick of being dictated to. So there's a swing back. So my advice right now is tune into people that you assimilate with. If you hear someone saying something that you like, find out a little bit more about him or her if they're in a political space. Back them. If you hear something that, hang on a sec, I haven't heard that for a long time, and that's my values. Tune into that and get involved. For too long, there's been the silent majority. We need the silent majority to become loud and proud again.
Yep. And I just hope that more people can come under your wing and your way of thinking. I hope that people have the courage to step into politics and be able to voice their opinion like you have. I think it's a great opportunity to be brave and not be so worried to offend people. Like the truth, unfortunately, the reality of the truth offends. And offends in both ways. Like I'm absolutely offended at the idea that we're letting babies that late being killed, right? Being left to die. It offends me deeply, but it's not like I don't want to hear it. I do want the truth. We should all desire the truth, even if it does hurt. And I think the truth is in jeopardy in this world. But I think you're also right. People have had enough.
Yep.
And America's normally they're a little bit in front of everyone else in terms of the culture swing. And I think it's happening here.
It is. And I just hope that our political leaders, if they're being elected on that culture swing, they have the strength to stand up and do what they're meant to do.
And also, everyone, stop with the status quo. It's not going to change. Liberal and Labor, they're going to do the same thing. You've got to raise leaders and vote for leaders that are going to affect change. And I feel like deep down, I wasn't as adamant about it last time, but you really are. You put your money where your mouth is. You really do. And so, I just hope there's more people like you that come into politics, Yeah.
I do some brave stuff in this space, not because I like to put my head on the political chopping block, but I want to inspire other people to be brave.
Yeah,
I want other people to say, hang on a sec, I've got the same values and I've been worried about sharing them. I want to put my face out there.
I'm not going to tell you how you do your business, but I'll tell you one thing. Having like a little weekly recap on your Facebook page about what went on that week and like this information that you've brought to the table here today, which is shocking and haven't heard about it. It'd be great just to, something for me, I would listen to it every week.
Yeah.
Like what happened this week, what went wrong, what went right, a little 10-minute breakdown, that would be really good. I mean, I encourage you to do that because I want to know, you know, I don't want to have to wait a year and a half to get this information.
We actually used to have a little podcast called the Cap Recap.
Okay.
That we used to do that once a week. I think we'll get back to doing that soon.
Yeah, I think it would be great. Anyway, thank you so much for coming and making the time. Really appreciate it. All the best. God bless.
God bless. Done.